After all the upsets, after all the drama, we are down to the final two of this year's Afcon. Nigeria trying to go for a fourth Afcon in their history and going up against Ivory Coast, who are trying to go for a third Afcon in their history. Which team will prevail? Oh boy, we're in for a dramatic final and something that encapsulates this Afcon perfectly. So here is the preview and prediction of this year's final. But people, we are joined by a special guest. Maher from African Five-A-Side Podcast will be helping me with the preview. So everybody, remember to go subscribe to his channel. He is on the road to 2K. So go subscribe to African Five-A-Side Podcast for everything around African football. And also, we are sponsored by SofaScore. Remember to download the SofaScore app in the description down below or scan the QR code. But here we go, people. The preview and prediction. When you think about this AFCON in 10 years, what's going to be the first thing on your mind?
Well, you're absolutely right that the entertainment value and the drama, I think, has been the best it's ever. I mean, at least in recent memory and recent history that I can remember. I also started watching the African Cup of Nations in 2004, and I never recall this many upsets, this many, world-class goals, the storylines. It's been such a dream for especially a neutral observer. It's been so enthralling because of the entertainment value. But the other thing that I think is a global observation of mine is that people like to talk about leveling the playing field. And I don't think that smaller nations, quote unquote, smaller nations, are producing much better players. I think there's two things that are happening. Number one, they're recruiting from their diasporas much better. So, like teams like Cape Verde from Portugal, or teams like Equatorial Guinea from Spain, they're finding players that perhaps in previous FIFA legislation, they wouldn't be able to switch their allegiance to represent their country of origin, but now they are able to do that. The FIFA forward funds have come in huge for a country like Mauritania, for example, in terms of building national technical centers and medical centers and improving good governance of the federation. So teams are recruiting better. The smaller teams are improving, but for me, the bigger problem is that the big teams have stagnated. And there's Julien Met, he's the coach of Rayon Sports in Rwanda right now, former coach of the Djibouti national team. I think he had a really pertinent tweet when he said, it's not that there are no more small teams in Africa, it's that there are no more big teams in Africa. So my main impression from this tournament is that this was one of those that was a landmark for me, in that I realized that if the bigger nations don't get world-class coaching coming in, then I think they're going to start disappointing, in consecutive Cup of Nations. We're going to have to see a level of improvement from the top 10 African teams on this continent.
That's a great point. I was thinking like this is a power shift. We've seen Cameroon, Ghana. I mean, Ivory Coast are still in the final, but we've seen the power shift of these top teams in Africa go onto the level playing field. And I try and explain this to people like, oh, there's not the individual talent anymore. But I say to you, look at the team for Cape Verde.
Yeah,
look
there
at
is.
Equatorial Guinea.
Yeah.
Look at Mauritania. I mean, they got ballers and playing in Belgium, and they're improving more and more.
Even a team like Mauritania, sorry to cut you off, but yes,
No,
like Abu Bakr Koita is, in the Jupiler League. I don't know how many goals he had. I think like 12 or 13. They have some decent players. Abu Bakr Kamara has Premier League experience. And yeah, like 20 years ago, Mauritania wouldn't have players like that. I agree.
Not even 10 years ago.
But when you compare them to Algeria or Senegal, even Algeria 20 years ago or 10 years ago didn't have a player like Riyad Mahrez, or didn't have players like Ismail Ben Nasser, top players playing at Roma, Milan, formerly at City, so on and so forth. And so I think the quality of player is improving across the board. But whereas previously, maybe the coaching that these smaller nations were receiving, like Cape Verde, when they made their debut in 2013, their coach was a part-time air control technician at the airport and part-time coach. Now they have Bubista, who's a really good coach, a full-time coach, and who's, having them playing wonderful technical and tactical football. So their level of coaching has improved, whereas at the very top teams, some countries like Cameroon or like Tunisia, their federation are in shambles and the coaching hasn't improved. And I think that's making a big, big difference.
But I mean, I'm still in shock of what I've seen transpire in this tournament with the upsets. I mean, I can't remember any international tournament. OFC Nations Cup. I mean, the Asian Cup this year has been wild. Euros, Copa America, Gold Cup. I have never seen anything like this AFCON. I mean, never. We may never see anything like this. So that's why I always tell people, cherish the moment. This is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation sort of international tournaments where you see the big teams go out in dramatic fashion as well. The fact that Ghana went out in that way to Mozambique, who had nothing to play for, I hope it continues. And I hope that we see, the Mozambiques get better. Even Lesotho, they drew with Nigeria, who are in the final of the Afcon. Historic, I think, in African football that also a lot of teams are trusting local coaches. Cape Verde, Equatorial Guinea, obviously now Ivory Coast, they're all trusting local coaches. I think that's the way. You can't keep trusting these guys, 65, 70-year-old coaches from Europe who, let's be honest, they're looking for a payday and they're just going to coach in Africa. So this is what I want to kind of start with. I want to start with the Super Eagles. I was very down on the Super Eagles and I uploaded a video on TikTok and I got absolutely ridiculed this past week. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. But if you've been following this team before the AFCON, you're like,
Yeah,
they drew with Lesotho. They drew with Zimbabwe. They
Zimbabwe.
don't look
Yeah,
good. They don't have any structure. Defensively, they're a mess. Yes, they have world-class attackers. But all of a sudden, it's changed. And Jose Pizarro, I think he's going with that sort of prime Jose Mourinho ball. He's flipped from Pizarro to Mourinho, and it's worked wonders. So I just want to get your thoughts. What are the strengths of this Super Eagles team, and what are the weaknesses heading into this final? And it's a big one as they're trying to go for their first AFCON since 2013.
yeah. To your defense, Michael, I think many of us had the Super Eagles disappointing in this tournament because, as you mentioned, the FIFA window prior to the tournament kicking off, they drew against teams like Lesotho and Zimbabwe, teams that, with all due respect, Nigeria should be beating, especially when you look at the quality of players on the squad. And one of the biggest criticisms of the coach Jose Pizarro coming into this tournament was that he was very stubbornly playing this 4-4-2, which often looked more like a 4-2-4 than a 4-4-2. It looked like it was split horizontally. He was throwing on too many strikers, not enough midfielders. It looked very disjointed and very chaotic and unorganized. And so, what credit to him, as you mentioned, he comes to this tournament and all of a sudden he plays in the first match a 4-3-3. And then for the rest of the tournament, they've been playing now a 3-4-3 or a 5-2-3. I like to call it a 5-2-3, but the coach calls it a 3-4-3. So he showed, first of all, that he showed that he's tactically flexible instead of just stubbornly sticking with that 4-4-2, which everybody could see wasn't working. So credit to him there. But then even the small things, like when Nigeria, for example, kick off, the start of a match or the start of the second half or after a goal, you'll see Semi Ajayi, their tallest center half. He's practically a striker. He goes all the way down the pitch. They'll play a long ball to him. He'll try to chest it down for Osimhen, and it nearly worked against South Africa, and it nearly worked, I think, against Cameroon or Angola. It nearly worked against Angola as well. So you can see that they're working on set pieces. When corner kicks, they'll bring Victor Osimhen back and they'll throw Ademola Lookman and Moses Simon all the way in attack, preparing for counterattack. So to be fair, I think Jose Pizarro has done a really, really good job in this tournament. And it's not because that he changed his ways and he made improvements that we can say that we were wrong prior to the tournament. No, based on the evidence we had prior to the tournament, Nigeria weren't going to play this way and they weren't going to win. But he made the adjustments here and he deserves a lot of credit for that. I think that's why Nigeria have played so well. So now they're lined up in this 5-2-3. They defend very well. They've only conceded 2 goals in this tournament. And I think
one was open play.
One was open play. Yeah, the other one was a penalty, right?
Yep.
I think even Senegal only conceded 2 goals in 2021, and Algeria only conceded 2 goals in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yep,
that's a good omen for Nigeria as well. So they're defending very well, and when they do get the ball, when they recover the ball, they've been deadly with vertical transitions. Yeah. Very balls over the top to Osimhen, who's a wrecking ball. He'll harry defenders. He'll bother them, and eventually sometimes he can nip at their heels and steal the ball away from them and create an opportunity by himself. So that's, in my opinion, the strengths of Nigeria.
Okay, so what's a weakness then for them? Is it that the lack of goals? If this gets to a high-scoring game, would you be worried for the Super Eagles? Because as much as Victor Osimhen off-the-ball work rate has been phenomenal, he's been amazing off the ball, his finishing has been lacking. As a striker of his quality, it's been lacking big time. I mean, I know some of the goals have been offside, and the goal he scored against South Africa, I almost felt bad for him because you could just see in his face, he's like, really? We're doing this again? We're going to VAR. We're going to cancel it. But because I don't really see a weakness other than just you have to be clinical. And especially in a final against this Ivory Coast team that have all the firepower and can make this a high-scoring game.
Yeah, missing big chances is their weakness. The thing is, they create the most big chances statistically in the tournament, but they also miss the most big chances statistically. And as you mentioned, some of it is they're lacking a little bit of luck. Victor Osimhen, I think he scored now 3 disallowed goals via VAR, and it's not always his fault. Like against Angola, I think he was maybe a centimeter or two offside. Last match against South Africa, there was a foul at the very beginning of the sequence
Yeah.
that ends up being a penalty. That's why it was ruled off. So, to be fair, it's not always his fault. Some of it is just a lack of luck, but some of it has also been poor finishing on his part. And the thing, you can't bench him because he does so much for you in every other aspect of the game, right? But you're absolutely right in that if it's a close game, a 0-0 or a 1-1, I just hope that Nigeria can find their shooting boots. It's the last game,
Yep.
number 7 out of 7. So for them, if they can find their shooting boots and if they can capitalize on some of these opportunities they're creating, they can score 3-4 goals per game. But we're yet to see that yet. So we'll see if they can find their shooting boots in the final match.
I said that after the second game or third game. I was like, if they play this style, they can win the Afcon. We always think flashy, high scoring, defensively, they're all over the place, but they're just going to outscore their opponents. Now they have structure. They're playing tournament winning football. That's what I like to call it, tournament winning
Yeah,
football.
agree.
It might not suit every Nigerian and saying, oh, why are we playing this way? If you want to win with this crop of players, I think this is the way to do it. So
Agree. No, I was just going to say maybe another, it's not necessarily a weakness, but one thing we have to monitor is that Nigeria haven't really rotated or used a lot of their bench players. They've stuck with practically the same starting 11 for most of their matches. Um,
yeah,
and I don't
that
know
was
if,
Mofi's first minutes as
yeah,
well in the
first
last game.
minutes. Yeah.
It was
Iheanacho as well.
crazy.
Kalachi
Yeah.
Iheanacho as well. So they've really stuck with, since they made the switch to the 3-4-3, with practically the same starting 11, unless a player like Sanusi last match was injured and they brought in Bright Osai Samuel as a right back. But if not for injuries, um, they haven't rotated much at all. And I wonder if there's an accumulation of a fatigue that might show itself in the final. Whereas Cote d'Ivoire have played with so many different players, especially across the front line, but so many different players, they might be a little more fresh. Even though Cote d'Ivoire had to travel more, Nigeria only played one match outside of Abidjan. These are things to monitor and things to keep in mind, I think,
Yes.
ahead of the final.
I have never seen in my lifetime, and I'm not that old, people. I might have a beard. I'm not that old. Manager gets sacked in an international tournament. The only case where I can think it's equivalent was Spain before the World Cup in 2018 when they sacked their manager resigned and he went to go with Real Madrid. I cannot remember a case like this. And now Emerson Faye might be pulling off one of the most miraculous jobs we will ever see in international football or club football or any sort of football, beach soccer, you name it. Emerson Faye is doing a miraculous job. And to think where they were, and you were there in Abidjan when this all went down, when they lost 4-0 to Equatorial Guinea. And then 12 days later, I tweeted it out to make an AFCON final. It's the stuff of Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, you name it, whatever streaming site. When they played against DR Congo, I was like, that was a complete performance. They had a shaky like 10, 15 minutes, I thought, in the first half where DR Congo looked good. Other than that, I thought they dominated. Haller should have scored 2 goals at least. So he had a free header, should have scored. So I'm really liking this Ivory Coast team. The only thing I do worry about them heading into this final, they leave themselves very exposed defensively. That would be a worry. And we'll see then when, because Kuzunu is going to be back. He's going to be back from suspension. Will he start? I thought Boli was really good in that game against DR Congo. That's the scary part as well for Nigeria. The squad depth and the bench options Ivory Coast have, it might be the best in this AFCON. I know we talked about Morocco and all these other teams, but Ivory Coast bench can make a huge difference in this match. So
No, same here. I can't recall anything like this too. As you mentioned, they start off pretty strongly, winning 2-0 against Guinea-Bissau. I was at that match, and you're thinking, I was just very impressed with their midfield, Seko Fofana, Ibrahim Sangare, and Frank Kessié. And you're thinking, oh man, they look good. They look really good. And then they lose to Nigeria 1-0, which at the time was seen as a poor loss. But in retrospect, I mean, that was that wasn't
not
that
too
bad of
bad.
a loss, right? Yeah, exactly. But the one that really, lit the house on fire was the 4-0 loss to Equatorial Guinea in the final match of the group stages. Losing to Equatorial Guinea is bad in and of itself. Not no disrespect to Equatorial Guinea, but if you're the host nation and if you're Cote d'Ivoire, that's considered bad for Ivorians. Losing 4-0 at home when you're hosting the African Cup of Nations, that's what sparked the disaster, really. And that's why the coach was fired, Jean-Louis Gasset, after the group stages of the tournament, even though Cote d'Ivoire were not eliminated. So he's fired. And not only that, the federation president and the prime minister of the country contact Hervé Renard, the current coach of the French women's national team, but the former coach of the Cote d'Ivoire national team in 2015 when they won the tournament. He was in Cote d'Ivoire for the tournament for this current iteration, and he was contacted by the federation president and the prime minister. They asked him if he's interested in the job. He says, "I can't refuse, but go talk to the French Federation because I'm under contract with them." And eventually, they can't come to an agreement. But in the meantime, there's an interim manager, as you mentioned, Emrys Faye, 40 years old, former international. He was he was an assistant under the former coach Jean-Louis Gasset, and so he knows the squad, he knows the players. But he also brings on like a few of his friends, like former teammates, Guy Demel, who was, I think, doing television punditry for Canal Plus during the tournament. All of a sudden, he's in a coaching squad. It's just
Oh
absolutely
my.
mad. And he finds himself. They qualify as the last best third place team. There are four third place teams that make it to the knockout stages, and they have to wait until the last day of the group stages. They need Morocco to beat Zambia, and Morocco beat Zambia. And the scenes in the city, I can't even tell you, like as if they had won the World Cup. And you're thinking, wow, like that's it just to get to the round of 16. But maybe they knew something that we didn't, because sure enough, they go on to play Senegal, defending champions, everybody's favorite. They beat them, and they deserve to win in Yamoussoukro in
Yeah.
penalty shootouts. And then they go on to beat Mali, despite being a man down 75 minutes throughout the match. They were man down, and they beat Mali in the last minute of extra time. And then, as you mentioned, I think their best performance, probably this complete performance against DR Congo, where they dominated the match, except for maybe 20, 25 minutes in the first half. So I've never seen anything like it. Ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. But I think we do need to give this interim coach, Emrys Faye, a lot of credit, because he said the
Yes.
first thing he did when he took over the team was that for 2 days, he worked on their psychology. He said the team was lacking confidence. And I said, I want to rediscover, I want to refine, mes éléphants, my elephants. I know you guys are world-class players. He was just trying to say believe in yourselves, believe in yourselves, believe in yourselves. He made a few personnel changes, and he got lucky in that two of their best players, Simon Adingra and Sebastian Aller, became fit as he took over the job. But still, he deserves a lot of credit for giving them that mental strength to battle to the end. Because I thought, for example, when they conceded against Senegal in the first 15 minutes, after losing 4-0 to Equatorial Guinea, you're
That was like
thinking,
the first 5 minutes.
right, sorry, first five
Yeah.
minutes, Habib Diallo,
Yeah.
great goal. You're thinking, this could get ugly quickly, because if Senegal add a second or a third, the fans are going to start booing their team as they did against Equatorial Guinea. The players their heads are going to drop. But no, they stuck in there. They fought it out. They were in tough positions time and time again, and they've shown incredible mental fortitude to get through it. So credit goes to the coach, in my opinion, Emrys Faye.
And if I have kids and I told them in 20 years, I'm like, let me tell you guys a story of just absolute insanity in Ivory Coast. And I'm going to explain to them, yeah, there's an interim manager. Maybe he won the Afcon. Maybe he didn't. You got to check out highlights on YouTube. This is the stuff of legends. But one thing I've really liked about Ivory Coast since he's been manager, that's one thing you said, is mentality. There's a clear switch in when they're even down. They could easily fold against Mali. 1-0 down, 10 men, 90th minute, they get an equalizer. And then they win in the 120th minute. There's mentality. That's what I like. And also the midfield is really playing well. Seri, who I don't really rate anymore, he's been excellent since he's come onto the field. Him, Kessie, Seko Fofana, and they can definitely dominate the midfield against this Super Eagles midfield, in my opinion. Obviously, it will be, and Nuyeka have played well. But Seko Fofana, Frank Kessie, Seri, they played excellent. So then what would be a weakness for them? Is it that they cut? Because when I watched them play in this last game against DR Congo, they did leave themselves exposed. And when you're going up against Osimhen, Moses Simon, and Lukman, you can't leave those spaces, especially to Osimhen. We saw what he did. He won the penalty against South Africa. So if it's Kozunu, Bowley, and Dika, whoever's going to be in that center back pairing,
I would absolutely agree. And the other thing that I would add is their defenders seem to make a lot of mental mistakes, uncalled for mistakes. Kosunu's red card against Mali was an obvious example of that. But even I remember in the first match against Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Bissau didn't create anything, but the only chances they had came from like bad back passes from Wilfred Singo or from what's the name, Ousmane Diomande, the 19-year-old center half.
Diomande, yeah.
Almost every on the left side of defense, Evan Ndika and Ghislain Konan, they've been solid. They haven't really made too much mistakes. But on the right side, whether it be Singo, whether it be Kosunu, whether it be Aurier, Boli a little less, as you mentioned, he's been a little more solid. But those three in particular have made pretty poor defensive errors time and time and time again. And when you're up against a player like Victor Osimhen, I've mentioned this a few times, but it's kind of like you know what, on your car, on your the rear view mirror on the side over here, it says this
Yep.
object is closer than it appears. That's Victor Osimhen. You know, if you turn your back to him, the speed with the the long strides, the speed at which he closes you down, he can like nip the ball from your feet and by himself create his own chance. I don't think anybody else in world football presses quite like he presses from the striker position. I do worry about that, is the Ivorian defenders making individual mental errors and somebody like Victor Osimhen capitalizing on that. In my opinion, that's probably one of their biggest weaknesses, yes.
We're in for an epic final. I was looking at how many times both teams have won the Afcon because I had to remind myself. Ivory Coast have won it twice. If they win, they match Nigeria for 3. And if the Super Eagles win, they match Ghana for 4. So there's a lot on the line here for when it comes to Afcon heritage.
Yeah, if we look back at history, like you say, the two times Cote d'Ivoire won, they won in 92 and 2015, and both times it was on penalty shootouts.
Oh,
And they were crazy penalty shootouts. I think both
the
of them,
2015 one was ridiculous. Boubacar Barry, man, what a
even,
legend.
even 92, I think 92, if I'm not mistaken, there might have been 12 or 13 shooters from each side. So they were both. So if that's an omen for this
Oh
final
no.
coming up, we might have a crazy penalty shootout on our hands. And Nigeria, I think when they look at history, they're going to say we've only ever lost 4 finals. 3 of them were to Cameroon, who are like their bogey side, and one of them was to a host nation, Algeria, in 1990. I do think this is going to play out as we expect it to, meaning Cote d'Ivoire should dominate in midfield. They should have more possession of the ball. Simon Adingra and Sebastian Aller
What a
have
baller.
completely changed things, yeah. But especially Adingra, I love that player so much. And think about, he came on against Senegal with 15 minutes to play. He dribbles past one player, saves the ball from going out, gives the ball to Aller, who finds a through ball to Nicolas Pepe, who wins the penalty. But it starts with Adingra. In Mali, he comes on in the 86th minute against Mali, and he equalizes in the 88th minute. So to save his nation, it's absolutely crazy. If it wasn't for him, and I think even the former coach Jean-Louis Gasset is probably thinking, man, yeah, of course, Emers Faye is doing this well. He has Adingra and Aller. But I think we underestimate, from an outsider's perspective, his importance to this team.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to watch Cote d'Ivoire's midfield. I'm excited to watch Simon Adingra and Sebastian Aller and see what kind of troubles they can provide Nigeria. I'm always excited to watch Victor Osimhen. Watching him in person, I recommend, if anybody has a chance to do that, you'll see so much more running than you do on television. He's so impressive. But I do think it's going to play out how we expect it to. I think Cote d'Ivoire are going to have more of the ball. Nigeria are going to try to be defensively solid as they have throughout the tournament and try to hurt them on counterattacks, or maybe try and hope that the Ivorian defenders misplay a few passes.
No, I fully agree with the Dingra. I mean, when I watched him at Royal Union Saint Jawad before he made the move to Brighton, I thought this kid is going to be excellent player. Obviously, he comes from the Right to Dream Academy, which right now is probably one of the best academies in the world with the way they're producing ballers over and over again. And then Haller is a big plus. So this is the key, though. Ola Aina, Kawambasi, how do they nullify a Dingra? These are all the small little battles that everybody's got to keep an eye on Sunday, because those are the difference that will keep either Nigeria winning this AFCON or Ivory Coast winning this AFCON. So thank you, Maher, for joining me as we previewed the AFCON final. And now here's my prediction for the AFCON final. We've kind of talked about the tactics and the weaknesses and the strengths, so I'm not going to really bore you with any more analysis. But here's my prediction. I'm going to go 1-1, goes to penalties, and I think the Super Eagles and Noah Bali is going to be the hero once again, and they will capture a 4th AFCON in their history. And unfortunately for Ivory Coast, with their historic run and mental run, it ends with an unfortunate final loss. And I think Nigeria will be lifting the trophy this year to end the most dramatic AFCON we may ever witness. Thank you all for watching. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Remember to download the SofaScore app. And one last thing, watch along on Sunday for the AFCON final, so you all better be joining me for that, because that is going to be an epic, epic watch along. Have a beautiful day. Stay safe in this crazy world. And until next time, adios.
Explain something.